Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to this webinar, Right About Me. My name's Gordon Main. I work with CELCIS at Strathclyde University, and I'm part of the Scottish Institute for Residential Childcare, or SIRCC, planning group. SIRCC is now in its 21st year as a conference, and for obvious reasons, we're meeting virtually, and we've got a virtual feast for you, and you can see some of the contributors to that on the screen just now. There'll be more people to follow. So we're joined by people who are absolutely passionate about and knowledgeable, and have done a great deal of work in relation to recording practice for all children and for children in residential care. The conference theme is the extraordinary ordinary, the power of everyday care, and the presenters are going to really dig into, what recording means for children in the everyday, how it can help them to heal, how it can support their identity, and how important it is for them. We're in quite a we're in a new period in Scotland. We've had the independent care review, which was driven by the voices of care experienced young people, and also saw evidence from the workforce, and you'll see a strong representation across all of that in the presentations this morning and in the panel discussion that we have later. The promise came from the independent care review, and the promise tells us that children must be listened to and meaningfully and appropriately involved. So we really want to dig into what does that mean for children in residential care in relation to recording practice. We may talk about access to records as well, but we have set out to think more about the everyday practice of residential workers and others who support that recording. The promise also tells us that we need to hold the hand of those that hold the hands of children, and so we are interested in what does this mean for the workforce as well. How can we support them, and how can we enable them to meet the needs of children in relation to what we write about them and how we write with them. I want before I introduce our presenters, I want to say a little bit about the format that we're going to use today, and how you yourselves can get involved. We've got a fantastic and really large audience. We've got the largest audience that we've had for one of these webinars, which we're really excited about. We have a really varied audience as well. I wouldn't normally pick out certain sectors from the audience, but we know that there are some groups of people who might not normally have joined a conversation about residential care. We have people from health, we have people from police, and we have all of the other people who are always committed to this agenda, and they are joining us this morning as well. And we really want you to be involved in this discussion. As you can see, you'll only see the faces of those people that are presenting, and you'll only hear their voices. Because of the size of the audience, we're not able to involve you in direct verbal or visual questions to the panel, but we really do want your questions. We want your comments, and we want to hear your passion about this. So you can do that electronically. You use the help. You use the question function on the website. There's a question mark. You click on that, and please don't wait to be asked questions. Please just fire away with your comments, what you think of what people are saying, and what your questions are for the presenters and for the panel that will follow. And we'll try our hardest to bring those questions to the presenters and to the panel, so that this can be a responsive thing. So you use that question function and not the chat function. We're not able to provide technical support during the webinar, but if you raise your hand, then Michelle McHugh, my colleague at CELCIS, she might be able to provide you with some level of support. The webinar and the panel after it will be recorded, and that means that you can, if you've not picked up something during the recording, if you've got any issues with your with your internet connection, or if you want to share this with colleagues and discuss as a part of a team, then that recording will be available, and it'll be available hopefully from tomorrow afternoon on the CELCIS website. You can also hear more about that through Twitter, through hashtag SIRCC 2020. So that's hashtag SIRCC 2020. And you can get involved in a debate about what's happening just now on that as well. So over to the format, and in a moment we'll introduce you to our first presenter. There'll be around about 45 minutes of presentations by the people that you can see on the screen, and also some video submissions, and then we'll follow that with around about 45 minutes of panel discussion, and there'll be a couple of other people that will be joining us on that panel. Now I'll introduce you to them after the presentations. We've really worked hard as a group to think about, and to borrow from social pedagogy, to think about the head, heart and hands of recording practice. So what do we think about recording? How do we feel about it, and why is it so important to the workforce and to young people that we serve? And what do we actually do with that information? How do we enact this, and how do we make things better for children that follow? So our presenters will be presenting on different aspects of that. We'll start with Kate McKinnon, who's a policy associate at CELCIS, and she's going to be talking about what's on paper and giving us a kind of a flyover the national policy in relation to recording. That will be then followed, I guess, by the kind of heart part of this, by people from Who Cares Scotland. So we have Lucy Hughes, who's a policy officer, she's on screen with us, and Peter Melrose, who is a development officer with Who Cares Scotland. And we've also got inputs from Lee, Linda and Chris, who are all members of Who Cares Scotland. Their work follows a care experience led campaign, and what they'll be focusing on is why all of this matters, and what needs to change. So we're really excited about that. We're then followed by colleagues from Aberdeen, and Aberdeen City have been doing some really exciting work around, and some of that in conjunction with Who Cares Scotland and with Kate. So it's a nice partnership here. They'll be looking at what's being tried in residential care practice. So this is kind of building on the hands of the practice. And the people that will be presenting there will be Mim Smith from the development team, Megan Perry, who's a team leader in residential childcare, and we have a video submission from Tiffany Burnett, who's a children's rights development assistant, and Tiffany will also be joining us in the panel afterwards. Lastly, we'll finish off with Kate's going to come back to think about the who, the what, and the where now. So looking at a bit of a toolbox for how we use some of this, and how people can connect further. So I'm now going to shut up, other than to remind you to please interact with us. Please send us your questions, and they'll all come through to me, and I can then get that back to people who are presenting, and particularly for the panel discussion later. So I think we're good to go, Kate, if you are, and so Kate is going to talk about the kind of policy overview, and you're very welcome, Kate.
Thank you so much, Gordon. Hello, everybody. I'm going to lean in so that you can see me. It's very sunny up here in Glasgow, and I want to not just be a duck blob. So I'm going to give a whistle-stop tour of the national policy and guidance in Scotland on record production, and hopefully it won't be too dry. I want to just start off by talking about children's rights. This is really timely with incorporation of the UNCLC, the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, being incorporated in Scotland soon. So though there is established case law on access to records in human rights case law, when we're looking at record production, Article 8 of the UNCRC is really important kind of starting point. So Article 8 is the child's right to preserve their identity. And so this has really clear and explicit implications for children separated from their families, about how we write about them and what information we need to kind of hold on to. But there's relevance to writing records across nearly any article of the UNCRC. So from the right to protection, the right for a child's best interest to be protected, and how this affects decisions made about them, to a child's view, to even the right to play in Article 31 and how we record information about their hobbies, as well as, of course, the right to recovery from trauma and the role records and really good records can have in that. So moving on to the Scottish context. So the kind of key bits of legislation and guidance in Scotland with relevance to records is the Looked After Children Scotland regulations of 2009. So regulations 42 and 43 and the statutory guidance on those gives us kind of really good information about what should be on records. Now this is mainly relevant to the records that social workers might write, but it's really useful for us to know about what's been written and how that guidance is given. So these regulations include information about kind of children's name, date of birth, their family members, but also their social development. So for example, interests and hobbies, as well as a child's plan and reporting on their welfare. And we also have information about how that should be maintained, the confidentiality and access to those. If we look at, for example, what's been written in the statutory guidance, the guidance stipulates that there should be a chronology of significant events for around a child's life. This is especially important for children who spent significant time in their life in care. But now this is framed in terms of the importance for a child to understand kind of the narrative of their life and their experience, as well as for professionals to make decisions about them. This is really useful, but now perhaps with kind of the knowledge and the learning that is being led by care experienced people about what matters to them in their records, we know that we might frame that more in terms of the kind of life story of a child, so kind of highlighting the importance of their relationships that matter to them, their experiences, and the kind of emotion in their experiences. So that moves us on really nicely to what the promise highlights about care records and the writing of records written in care. So the promise has emerged from the Independent Care Review, and the need for records to capture the experiences, feelings, and relationships of the child is really emphasised. But that records might currently focus more on the administrative aspects of the care system and the expectations of the care system, rather than those things that are really important to care experienced people. The promise talks about this importance of life story and the unique capacity of records to tell the stories of children who are care experienced. And whilst considering that those stories may include experiences of trauma, and this really emphasizes the need for considerate, simple, plain English language. Another something else that's really important in the promise around the writing of care records is the importance of ownership and a sense of ownership over records. So this has implications in terms of access to records, but also in terms of writing records. This is about ensuring that children's records kind of capture their experiences and what matters to them, and that children also have the capacity and the ability to shape their own records. So that's what we mean when we talk about the sense of ownership. Of course, the discussion of language throughout the care review and its capacity to create realities that might also include stigma is really relevant to writing care records. And this challenges professionals to use accessible, non-stigmatizing and non-systemic language, so language that children use in their everyday lives rather than language of the systems, the administrative systems of the care system. So just to kind of quickly talk about other national guidance, there's kind of a range of kind of national or organisational guidance written about care records. However, these often include only really basic guidance about these issues that we know matter to care experienced people. And I know that Miriam, who'll be speaking, has been working on guidance that might challenge that, and TACT, so language that cares, also challenges that. So we're really keen to hear from you on guidance that's been particularly useful within your organisation at conveying the things that matter to care experienced people in their records and how we kind of overcome the challenges. I'll give a quick overview of some of the challenges that have emerged nationally, but my colleagues are going to go into much more detail about these. So as I've said, language and making sure that records are accurate and they're not stigmatizing is really important, and how to do this, the time constraints or the kind of demands of the system and the statutory or legal terms that you might need to use, and then the need for kind of developing skills within the workforce to be able to overcome those challenges is really important. And that's me 20 seconds over my time. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues who can go into much more detail about what this actually means in practice.
Kate, that's absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for doing that. I think what you've really successfully done is it's given us a really great overview of the legislation and the guidance that applies to children, but really thought about you know, exactly what it means for children and the everyday. I love how you've spoken about life story, about relationships, about making sense and capturing experiences, and about how children can shape that themselves. So and you know, you've raised up some really important issues there about being non-stigmatizing, and I know these are all things that Peter and Lucy are passionate about, and will no doubt speak a little bit about in their session. So thanks so much for that, and also for raising up, you know, some of the continuing challenges. We know that changes in legislation and guidance themselves won't take us to the promised land. So it's a combination of things, and we'll pass over now to Lucy and to Peter to really think about you know, why does all of this matter, and also what needs to change, and they'll be joined by some celebrity so video clips as well, won't you, Lucy? So will I pass over? I'm not sure who's starting, but you guys just go ahead. Welcome.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having us today. So me and Peter are really here to highlight how our care experience members at Who Cares Scotland have been pushing for change in how care records are not only accessed, but how they're valued, and importantly how they're written for future generations in care at the moment. So for us as an organisation, we're care experience led, we're a membership organisation, so it's vital that care experience people are at the heart of any kind of policy and practice change which we push for as an organisation. And really this is not just about sharing their own lived experience of their own records that they may have accessed or read, but also being part of driving solutions. That's really important to us. We've recognised through the process of working with our care experience members of the unique value that a record has in a care experience person's life. And that's going to really be one of the themes of the input that we've prepared today. Focused work on this sort of area began about 2 years ago with care experience members coming to us as an organisation and asking for us to work on this project. It's always been something that's important and of interest. It was covered by the Independent Care Review, and many individuals with care experience have spoken about the importance of care records in their lives. But I feel like now we're really on a wave of momentum for making that change happen, especially in terms of recording practice, which is why we're here today. So our input really is not about myself and Peter talking much about the work. It's about us introducing some fantastic care experience members who've put their time into pre-recording some inputs for you, which we'll be able to show. So first of all, we'll start with an input from Lee and Linda, or Lee Davidson and Linda Gregg, and they're going to reflect on their own care records and why they matter. but also they're going to talk about their hopes for what they want to see change, and they've prepared sort of a message for people watching today. I'll then hand over to Peter, who works up in Aberdeen, and he'll speak a little bit about kind of the grassroots work that he's done alongside care experience people there. And we'll finish off with a video from our member, Chris Marshall, who will reflect on his experience of care records being written whilst he was living in residential, but also as an adult accessing those as well. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Lee and Linda for their video.
I'm Linda. I'm a care experience member with Who Cares and a volunteer. I get involved with the Care Records campaign back at the start through discussions we were having in the alumni group, and we were all discovering that each and every one of us had a very different experience trying to get access to our care records and what we found in our care records. So I think that was the biggest thing for me. Was at the time I hadn't actually accessed my records, and it was what helped me to take that first step to take and access my records.
My name's Lee. I'm a care experience member of Who Cares Scotland, a volunteer and a member of the board. And I first got involved with the Care Records campaign when I went to my first meeting with Who Cares Scotland as part of the alumni. When we were having it was just a natural conversation at that point, and the more that we were kind of having that conversation, the more clear it was becoming that being able to access your care records was quite a bit of a minefield based on everyone's sort of experiences around the table. They were all quite different. As a group, we decided that it was something that was important to all of us to take forward.
For me, what was important for the care records is the way it was written. It's obviously it was very cold, it was very hard, it was very factual, and of course we need that cold hard facts in there. But I think for me, I was looking for a missing piece of my jigsaw, for something to tell me what was going on in my life in that time. And I know what happened. I was there, I lived through it. So I think for me, it was trying to find that impartial piece of factual information that I didn't need to take in my family's opinion or my family's lies about. It was to find that actual piece of information that was there. And when I got it, it was redacted so much, and the handwriting that was on it is illegible. I can't read it. I can't tell what it says, and the stuff that's in it is like kind of, it seems irrelevant to what was actually going on at the time. I think for me, it needs to have that journey of what happened to me, how I felt at the time. I mean, I went through my exams at the time, and it doesn't mention my exams in that year, and I was in care, and that was the biggest thing for me as a 15-year-old, and it's not in my care records. So it's that, it's not what's in it for me, it's what's missing for it from me, and what I was hoping to find in it that just wasn't there.
For myself, recognising why it's important to have the access to the care records, and the importance that a care record represents for a person is when you're going through your healing journey, and especially when you're trying to heal and understand who you are as a person, and I suppose forming the narrative of your own identity. When you've been in care, there's lots of gaps in who you are and what you remember, and lots of people made decisions for you that you, I suppose, especially older care experience people like myself, we weren't privy to the information about the decisions that were made about us. I know that they're more involved now, but there even are still to this day decisions made without young care experience people's knowledge. And I think when you start your healing journey and you're trying to recognise who you are as an individual, there's so many questions and there's so many gaps in who you are, and you're aware of the fact that the narrative and the rhetoric that you've been given by the people around you is that you have no value and you have no worth. So care records are about filling in those gaps about what happened at the most traumatic and most impactful part of your life. Where were you, and at what point were you supported to have a more positive narrative of who you are and your identity? So for me, the access in the care records was a huge thing, and filling lots of blanks, especially when, for instance, my internal voice is quite negative. For people accessing their records, that's what it's about. It's about unanswered questions. It's about gaps in memory. It's about gaps in parts of their life, like huge chunks of their life just missing, that they don't know what's happened because other people had that control and that decision-making ability over their lives. So when accessing the records, that's what you're giving someone. You're giving them that information, and that's why it's important to make sure that that information you're giving them is the right kind of information and it's of the right narrative.
For everyone to think of a child in your life and think about, right, how would you feel if someone wrote that down? If you what you're about to write, would you be happy if that someone wrote that about that child in your life? Because everyone's got a child in their life, whether it's a niece, a nephew, a neighbour, whatever. Everyone knows a small child in their life. Imagine what you would feel like if that was getting written about that child. Someone that you care about, someone that you would stand up for. How would you feel if what you're writing was written about them?
My turn?
It is your
Go
turn,
for it.
Peter. Yes, sorry, I was just waiting
you're
for
right.
you to jump in there.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I'm Peter Melrose. I'm the development officer here in Aberdeen. I work with care experienced young people with Who Cares Scotland. Lucy was saying at the start, just picking up on what was some of the comments in that video, Lucy said at the start, this has been going for about 2 years, and I commenced in my post about almost 2 years ago. And one of the first things that young people came to me and were talking about was that they wanted to actually do work on how records were written and accessed. And a young person said something to me that's really stuck, and she said that my record is what you read before you meet me. It's not who I am, it's who you think I am. And we talked a lot about how records focus on deficit, they focus on problems and trauma, things that have gone wrong, but never the good moments and never the important moments to the young person that actually work on identifying them. And we talked about how it would be important to actually have records which are actually quite precious documents for young people, written with a sense of love and knowledge about the young person rather than almost a pathology that occurs to the side. So we started to share that experience and form what turned out to be a grassroots campaign. We took it to Who Cares Scotland. At the same time, the city were working on a bunch of stuff as well in residential care and really starting to develop how they were writing records in that way for young people, which I'll let them talk about shortly. But the point about it is that it kind of wove nicely into a real genuine partnership of everybody listening to everybody else. And we're actually able to inform and really influence from young people how the city would actually start to look at how records were written and developed with these things in mind. And we all remember meetings where we stood up and said they need to convey love and they need to talk about love. And it's really kind of moved on quite a bit since then. We shot a video because young people wanted everybody to understand what it's like to be written about by somebody else, where you don't have much to say about what's being written about you, even though it is you. And we've got a small trailer of that we're going to show, and a bigger edit of that will be available on the Who Cares website. But we gave that also to the city to look at in terms of how records were written, and it had a significant effect where people just sort of watched it, and I think it sort of moved the process more. And I think what's important about that is when we actually put young people in the middle of the thing that we're talking about, it's way more powerful. And so that's why we wanted to sort of show some of these things. So we're going to show this little teaser trailer of the video now. But yeah, so just have a look at that and see what you think.
Be right when you write about us.
Be right when you write about us.
You're such a tease, Peter. I think everybody will be watching that thinking, what, you know, we're so much looking forward to seeing what else is said.
Awesome. So yeah, it'll be lovely, and it's just, I guess the really important part here was to hear directly from young people, in a really lovely and important way, how records can be, and the world honestly can be a lot simpler when we just ask young people what to do. Like they just go do this, and you know, I think Aberdeen will talk shortly about how they did that.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Peter. And we just have one last input, which was recorded by one of our members, Chris Marshall, who has been part of the Care Records work alongside Lee and Linda, and obviously all of the young people in Aberdeen Peter's been working with. So it'd be great if we could just hear from Chris, and then that's us.
I'm Chris. I'm 20 years old, been involved in multiple projects, from a Champions Board in Edinburgh to Falkirk to also the Our Care Records planning group. I became involved with the Care Records work when I was a part of the alumni. It was actually my first session at the alumni where we were talking about Care Records. Gregor asked me to be a part of the Our Care Records campaign group. Care Records matter as everybody needs their own identity. You need to know where you come from. And unfortunately for people who aren't care experienced, they don't understand why we need the records and why they happen. Also for them, they're quite lucky because they know where they've came from. They know what they're doing with their life. They know who their family are. For some care experienced young people, they don't even know who their mum or dad is. That's why it's very important to have care records. My own records, I've been reading it and going, what does that mean? It's very wordy and very non-child friendly. There's a lot of legislation written in your records, and you still don't understand that even when you grow up, even when you're trying to look into it, because it changes so much. So you could have something that says legislation from 5 years ago, but that's changed that much that you can't actually find it anymore anywhere. And even if you ask professionals, they don't even understand what it means, but even though they've written it about you. Some of my care records were written with me, some were written without me, and some I was not even allowed to read before they went to a children's hearing panel. It all depends on the local authority area, and it also all depends on the individual member of staff, if they're willing to have the time to sit and write your records with you. When I was being able to sit in the room to basically write my own records with with member of staff, it was enjoyable because I could put in there what I wanted to put in there, and I can see that throughout my records as the change from when I was in places where I couldn't sit with them and write my records to when I was in places where I was more than welcome to sit and write my records. You can see the difference in the language they use. I could see the difference in they took time and care over them. It wasn't rushed. They weren't emotionally disengaging from it. It was all about you. It wasn't about all the bad things you did. They put more positives in it. That it was really useful for me as well. Even thinking back on it, there's a few members of staff what took the time to tell me what everything meant in it, so they would take the time to go over the records before they even sent them in. Stop being so secretive about when you're writing young people's records. Start telling them, look, I'm having to write your records. This is the reason why. This is what I'm going to put in it. Take the time. Don't just spend an hour with them going over it. Take 2-3 hours. Take as long as it needs for that young person to understand why their records have to be written. We've got to understand where the young person, the care experienced young persons came from. You've got to have that understanding of they've went through a lot of issues previously and they've got a lot of things going on in their head that they might not want to talk about with you because they don't have that bond with you, because it's really hard for any care experienced young person to have a bond with anybody. Like for me, I only had a bond with one worker at all in my residential unit, and that was because I felt so let down by so many people, so I didn't want to make that next person trust the next person, so I didn't want to be let down like I have been previously. I wanted to know who I was. oh wow, yeah, you can put as care experience person, right, that's my identity, but what does that actually mean? Where do I come from? Why have I moved around so much? Why don't I have like my mother or my father in my life? Where are they? Where were they when I went into care? I wanted to know about me. I wanted to learn about me. Yes, I'm living through everything, but I'm living through it. I'm not understanding it. They're two completely different things. Until I got my records, I was emotionally disengaged from most things. I didn't have emotions to most things because I didn't know who I was. I never had that understanding. I never was taught who I was. Like nobody ever took the time to go, you're in care, but this is what it actually means. This is what we should be doing. Nobody ever took that time. And if you take that time with one young person, it'll help them later in life. Like right now, I'm going through some services to get some counselling to figure out where I am, because even though I've read my files, it's still upsetting me. There's still traumatic things in there, which I'm personally still working through. And you need to understand that, yeah, they might seem like they've got over it, but they haven't. It'll come back to bite them later on in life, and that's where users, people who have written the records, you need to be mindful of that as well.
Thanks so much to Lucy and to Peter for their presentations, and I think like all of you, I'm absolutely blown away by those video presentations from Lee and from Linda and from Chris. I think I probably sold Who Cares short a little, sold Who Cares Scotland short a little bit when I said that they were going to almost do the heart part for us. Actually, they're doing the hands as well, aren't they? They're showing us the way. They're showing us what really needs to happen, and they've done that, much of that, or some of that in partnership with Aberdeen, and we'll hear from Aberdeen next. I just wanted to really acknowledge the input there. The unique value of care records is really what comes across strongly from Who Cares Scotland, and Chris at the end there just showing us a really clear way through this, through transparency, time, building relationships, and doing things together. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that from Megan and Mim, who are now on your screens. Guys, you're going to talk about your own experience in Aberdeen City and what it's taken to move yourselves forward. So you're very welcome, and take it away.
Hi, so I'm Mim Smith, and I suppose the record work for us. Sorry, I seem to have an echo.
I would just carry on, Mim, and we'll see if we can
okay.
do something at our end. But carry
it's
on.
Just
for
I'm
just
getting a delay.
We can hear you clearly. There is a slight echo, but we'll work on that.
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yes,
yeah?
We can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I guess the professional work for us started in 2017 with a multi-agency audit that we did that was looking at children who were on the Child Protection Register. And how we write was not the main focus of that work, but it did make recommendations for us that I suppose included things like having a clearer focus on the child, using a shared language that non-professionals could understand, asking us, I suppose, to address our system and jargon language that we used in writing, and also having making sure that the analysis that we did of our information was clearer and more concise. So our response to that was to review guidance that we had for our children and young people about the way that we wrote about them, and that would guide the way that our staff were writing. So in addition to that, we have now drafted some learning sessions to supplement that, and collectively these provide an opportunity for our staff to reflect on the writing that they do, to understand the impact that their writing can have, and so it gives them an opportunity to explore the legal and ethical context of their writing, specifically looking at it in relation to their codes of practice, their continuous learning framework, and to support staff to understand that this is an integral part really of the relational and work that they do, of their communications with families, rather than being a separate administrative task. It also looks at language and writing styles, so helping staff to recognise the jargon and system language, supporting them to adopt plain English writing style, and looks at the importance of the child's voice, their stories in the writing that we do, the ownership of our own professional voices, and also helping staff to recognise passive and more defensive writing styles and what these can do to the meaning that we convey. It looks at summarising, they're looking at research, analysis and outcomes as part of this, exploring the importance and interrelationship between these if we're to write effectively for the children and families that we support. How to deal with conflict of opinion in our writing so that we can represent all of these voices and within the writing that we do, and the importance and relationship between the analysis and outcome planning that workers are doing. We're in the process of testing this at the moment with some of our social work units before we roll this out for all of our staff. I suppose the other significant event that happened for us in Aberdeen was a seminar that took place in December 2018. This was delivered by our Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry team, along with the support from Who Cares Scotland. And I guess the highlight and main focus of that was presentations from people who've got lived experience of care, talking about their experience of accessing their records. And it was at this seminar that our Chief Executive, Angela Scott, made the decision to set up a records improvement project. This project has got two strands to it. The first is looking at improving the process for subject access request so that people get the support that they need when they access their record, and making that whole process just a more person-centred process. The other part of that is about records improvement so that we can improve the way that we write for the future. And so the Write About Me Future Proofing Records project started in early 2019. This is a multi-agency project that's looking at improving writing practice across all of the agencies that contribute to the records for vulnerable children and young people. So it's put the writing that we do as an integral part of the therapeutic and relational work that we do with children and families. And it has become part of our corporate parenting and children's rights agenda here in Aberdeen. We have written it to our local outcome improvement plan, and it will contribute to our integrated children's service plan, and more recently to the work that we're doing to become a child-friendly city and our response to the promise. So it has four main themes. The first is how we write. So this is looking at the language that we use in procedures for our staff. It's looking at guidance about writing for staff and workers across all of our partner agencies. We are in the process of, we have drafted standards for writing about vulnerable people, and we will, this will help to inform work that we do around principles of good recording. It looks at children's rights in records. It's looking at the co-production or collaborative writing, involvement of children and young people and their families in the writing that we do. Exploring concepts of love, empathy, language choices, and what these can do, so that we are supporting staff to adopt a more natural language that people would use when you talk about your own family, really. And this is informing a piece of work around language that cares, with our young people exploring the words that we use to help staff understand better and recognise their own jargon. So the second part of that, the second theme is how we learn how to write. So this is looking at learning for our existing staff and has informed the learning sessions that we've written. But it's also about working with our training establishments, with our universities, with our colleges here in Aberdeen, to ensure that people who are coming into professions will experience a syllabus that informs them about the trauma that children and young people may have experienced who are coming into care, and to understand the practice and the ethics and responsibilities then that come with the writing that they'll be expected to do. Thirdly, it's looking at systems that we use to write, how we can use these systems better for and with the children and young people that we work with, to give them more involvement, control, autonomy over their records. And then lastly, it's, are you writing right about me? So that's the role of quality assurance in maintaining standards for and expectations around writing, and to build it into our multi-agency quality assurance framework that we have here in Aberdeen, that will do regular audits across all of our partners. But also to build it into our internal and external scrutiny that takes place here for us. I'm going to pass you on now to Megan Pirrie, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about what's happening in our residential services. Thank you.
Thanks, Mim. So in 2017, in line with what Mim said, Children's Services staff in Aberdeen City Council were trained in dyadic developmental psychotherapy. So what we found is that DDP has provided staff with a therapeutic framework for working with children who have experienced neglect and abuse, and as a result have suffered from significant developmental trauma. Within residential services, the DDP approach has been embedded into the everyday culture. Staff's comments, such as "it's finally a way to understand our kids that just makes sense," allows us to identify how enthused staff have been, how helpful the approach has been in helping them make sense of the child's experience to support them and to recover. Now, I've actually took some notes from what Lee, Linda and Chris have said, and I want to link some of the things that I'm saying here to what they've quoted. So in regards to supporting the child to recover, both Linda and Lee had talked about their healing journeys and how difficult that is with a poor record. So I really think that that directly links to how we're trying to develop our records here in Aberdeen. So DDP is put into practice by using the principles of PACE. So PACE is not about an intervention, but instead is a way of thinking, feeling, communicating and behaving. Now, the aim of this is to make the child feel more safe. With the use and understanding of PACE, we have additional insight that supports our capacity as residential workers to build an increased emotional safety, which allows the child to start building trusting relationships. So as Chris said, he felt he had one significant relationship, and actually that had helped and supported him into writing better records, in which they took time and they cared. So that was two words that I thought were really important that linked to trust and relationships. Taking that time and that sense that the member of staff cares. The 4 principles of PACE are playfulness, acceptance, curiosity and empathy. These 4 principles have allowed the staff to have a better understanding of the context of the behaviours, thus allowing them to provide more analysis in the way that they write about the child and how they understand the way that they're behaving. So the DDP and PACE has supported the residential workforce in developing skills to explore and wonder alongside the child or young person about tricky or difficult situations, topics that often can be avoided. By being curious about behaviour with and alongside the child or young person, it allows them to feel more understood and begins to develop the skills to identify feelings and emotions. So again, I think that would resonate in what Chris has said in regards to struggling with his identity and struggling with how he's reading his record and how that had made him feel. It is recognised that when children and young people display increased understanding of their emotional world, that they're more able to separate their behaviours from their sense of being and therefore experience less sense of shame. With increased empathy in our discussions with the children and young people, it allows us to have a great understanding of the young person and how their prior trauma may affect them. So we're very lucky in Aberdeen in that we have a clinical practitioner just for our residential services. So work is ongoing alongside our clinical practitioner to allow for continual reflection and development in the way in which we write. So something that I think, again, really made me think when Lee, Linda and Chris were speaking was that we have really highlighted the importance of completing memory books alongside our children residential. So the central focus being that the young person and the key worker, or whoever they see as a significant relationship, will make that memory book together. Children often look back on their care experiences and read difficult and upsetting things with no tangible or shared happy experiences. By the use of memory books, it allows for both staff and young people to share joyful experiences in the way that they want to remember them. So some of the examples we've had is young people going on trips, going on holidays, sharing tickets and sharing photos. I was recently actually contacted by one of the children's homes I worked in prior in Aberdeen because we have some photos of me and a young person together when we went to Cadonas, and she wanted me to write a short paragraph about that day. So I'm sure the young people will be delighted, or the young person will be delighted to find out that it was all about how much he was better at me at mini golf and bowling. So they still are contacting staff that actually not necessarily in the home at that time, but maybe somewhere else in the council to get that experiences and that joyful memories together. Something else that we're currently developing is our monthly case summaries. So what we're trying to do is further engage and involve the young person. So they're taking place in the home with the clinical practitioner and the key worker, and the young person is invited to attend. So during this summary, therapeutic goals for both the young person and the staff are identified, whereas prior it was just about reflection on how the previous month had gone. This allows for an agreement between both the young person and the key worker about what they hope to achieve, and also supports the recognition that they're not on this journey alone. Another example that we thought would be helpful to highlight is that we're currently trying to change the way that we're writing our risk assessments in one of our children's homes. In the past, young people have shown little interest in contributing to the risk assessment and have not understood the language used. And again, we heard Linda talking about really struggling to read some of the language that she found in her care record. So the risk assessment template was altered to allow their inclusion in their own needs-led assessment. This allowed the young person to discuss and explore their own individual risk. By the introduction of a scaling question, which allows both the young person and the key worker to scale the severity of the risk, it has allowed for the exploration of the risk to help reduce anxiety in staff, but also, sorry, my cat is trying to join, also increase understanding in the young person. So we had an example of this, what happened recently, in which it was staff, bear with me. An example of this was when a young person felt that staff contacted them too much when they were in the community because the staff were worried about the young person's safety. So with the use of the scaling question from 1 to low and 10 to high, and the understanding of the young person's past experiences, it was clear that the young person did not find these check-ins helpful or caring, and instead found them restrictive. The young person and key worker then began to explore what would allow the staff to feel comfortable that they were safe, but also allow the young person to feel cared for. This allowed for a raised understanding of the young person and what was a risk to them in their view, but it also allowed the staff to lower anxieties in regards to how they felt about that risk. This discussion then became a part of that young person's risk assessment and has since supported the young person in reducing their own risk and identifying their own vulnerabilities. This way of writing and co-production with young people is further strengthened in Aberdeen with the introduction of the Mind My Own app. We're now going to show you a video where Tiffany Burnett tells you more about this.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Burnett and I'm a Children's Rights Development Assistant. I work with care experienced young people, supporting and encouraging them to express their views in the aim to improve their life chances and improve things around them. And I also have care experience myself. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about the Mind My Own app. The app is for young people as ages 3 up until the age of 26. We'll have 2 versions of the app that allows us to accommodate the ability of the user. We'll have the Express app, which is for children and young people with additional needs. One app is where young people can have their own accounts, which can be used on devices such as an Xbox. People can put information about their life in their own words, and it allows them to have input in their meetings. Prior to the young people participation with the app, we found it was quite difficult to get young people involved in having your say forms before their meetings and also the feedback forms afterwards. Having the Mind My Own app helps young people to understand what will happen in their meetings because it can open doors for them to talk to their workers and will also show their worker the understanding around what's going to happen or has already happened in their meeting. It's a tool that we can use to show understanding in discussions about it. We felt that the Mind My Own app would support us to get feedback and allow for young people to be more involved in the care they get and also the plans around their care. Statements cover a variety of topics, which can be good things from things like a young person having their first baby, going on holiday, exam results. It can also be things like a young person wanting to talk about their family at their next LAC review that's coming up. We introduced the app here in March 2019. Since then, 174 young people have their own accounts. That is 608 times that a young person has been heard and listened to in their own words. These are words that cannot be changed and altered, and the statements that they send in will also go into their social work records as well. Young people in residential children's homes use the app to share news for their LAC reviews and hearings before the meeting. It makes people aware of what the young person wants to talk about and allows them to be prepared for what the young person wants to talk about as well, and also allows them to understand what might be going on for that young person as well. A young person regularly walked out of his reviews without his voice being heard before the use of the app. Although sometimes he does still continue to be overwhelmed in his meetings, and he knows his voice is being heard now because he knows that he has put a statement in about what he actually wants to talk about. And if he walks out of his meetings, he feels secure knowing that people are going to be hearing about what he actually wants to talk about as well. A worker has gave us a statement about the use of the Mind My Own app, which I would like to share with you today. As a worker, the Mind My Own app has supported me to engage with clients and seek their views in a non-threatening and, in the case of the Express app, child-friendly way. It is easy to navigate for workers and clients alike, and when workers are present as Mind My Own is being used, it allows conversation to flow and in ways it might not have done without the prompts within the app. The resulting PDF that is created once a child or young person sends their Mind My Own response to their chosen worker is documentation of their views and the perception of their circumstances. The PDF cannot be edited by professionals and can be submitted in meetings and hearings where the child or young person may not feel comfortable attending, or it is not appropriate for them to do so, to ensure their voice is heard and taken into consideration. The work that we've been doing here in Aberdeen is making sure that the child's voice is heard. So I thought it would be really nice to end today's session with a quote from a young person who uses our app. Having the Mind My Own app has really helped because often when I have a problem, I need it fixed now, but it can't always be because my workers are busy or off or it's a weekend. So even if I'm having a tough day and I feel like it can't wait, I can rest knowing that my worker will see the report I sent via the app first thing in the morning or when they get to work, and then things can be sorted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Really powerful, and thanks, Megan and Mim. Such rich content coming from all three of you. Really, from Mim, just what it takes to turn the whole ship around, and that from the whole organisation and from all agencies, and you went into some great detail about how that can be achieved in the journey that you're on, and you're the first to acknowledge you've not got there yet. So thanks so much for sharing that with us. Megan, just the power of and Tiffany, the power of co-production and really listening to young people, and just really fascinating how you've embedded recording practice in all of the therapeutic childcare rather than seeing it as something that is somehow a separate task. So it's lovely to hear. And Tiffany, just those examples that you gave have really been led by children and young people's voice, and truly empowering young people. Just fantastic to hear, and so thanks so much for sharing. We've got a lot of comments coming in, and just a reminder that the panel's coming up shortly, and if you have questions for the panel, we'll be joined by some of the people that have presented. For example, we have from a couple of different people, we have comments about from Liz Mitchell about writing love letters to children in the way that we record, and you know how powerful that is, and that's then shared by Natalie Ward, who talks about an example from the Open Home Foundation in New Zealand. You know, a very similar kind of example. That might be worth looking up, guys. And also just a comment of, you know, endorsing the presenters today, Kenneth Dunn. It was great to hear from people who have been in care, felt their emotions. So obviously having an impact here, guys. So thanks so much for that. Megan and Mim, thank you, and we'll move on now to Kate, who's going to she's going to complete the presentation part of this. And thanks for joining us again, Kate. It's been a really rich discussion so far, and Kate, you're going to kind of point us in the right direction, just quite briefly around what where now with some of this and how people can connect. So thanks for joining us again.
No, thank you. I've changed rooms because I know there was an issue with the light flashing, so that's why there's a scenery. It's just been really great to hear from everybody, to hear about the work going on in Aberdeen and the campaigning work that's been led by care experienced people. We're really keen to kind of look at how we can, as Gordon said, kind of share those resources, keep on sharing this learning and the challenges, and how those challenges are being kind of the really innovative ways that kind of people are overcoming them. I've compiled some of the resources that have either been mentioned here and a few others that I'll talk about, and they'll be circulated after this webinar by my colleagues. But just to kind of, as Gordon said, invite and to continue inviting some of the conversations from the comments, and we'll discuss these in the panels, and to kind of say that we'll be looking at how we can start to collate the kind of resources and the learning and the different practice improvement projects that are going on across Scotland, so that we can share that knowledge in the best way for people. And that's work that we'll be doing in the near future. So do get in contact with me, and my contact details can be shared with the resources that we'll send out after the webinar. To just quickly chat about some of the resources that we will share. So we will of course share the video teaser that Peter mentioned, that's being produced by Who Cares Scotland members, the Be Right When You Write About Us campaign. That looks fantastic, that teaser. And we'll also share a link to a report by Who Cares Scotland members that was produced last year, Our Lives, Our Stories, Our Records, which is a really important and fantastic document. It focuses on access to records, but there's really kind of significant information about what care records mean to care experienced people, and what this means for writing practice. I know that Miriam and Megan have said that they're happy to share some of the resources that they're creating in Aberdeen. So we'll look at how we can share those as well after this webinar and in the work going forwards. I'll also share a link to a really fantastic resource produced by TACT, and I know that Sarah from TACT is talking in the webinar in a moment, and that's Language That Cares, and it's a fantastic way of thinking about the kind of some of the challenges of writing for these multiple audiences, where we've got the kind of language from the system, which I know it's been mentioned that it changes so much regularly, it's not even comprehensible a few years later, and kind of can really affect care experience people when they're kind of reading this kind of systemic administrative language about things that are so important to them. So that's a great document The Open University also got a really great resource at Writing in Social Work Practice, or WISP, and there's a website outlining kind of all the different research and work that's going on to improve and to kind of upskill practice in writing that's for social workers, but is really applicable for anybody writing records about care experienced people. Mind of My Own app will circulate the link to the website with more information about that, because that's just fantastic. And there's also another great resource from the British Association for Social Workers, Recording in Children's Social Work Practice, for some really useful and important guidance in there as well. So I think that's me done.
Okay, thanks so much. Just to follow up on your link there to Mind of My Own, we've got a comment from Natalie Ward at Mind of My Own. She says, we love how Child Centre Scotland is around the voice of the child, and we love working with Scottish organisations to champion the voice of the child. If anyone would like to learn more about Mind of My Own, please let them know they can contact me. So we'll provide her details.